Just had the feeling, that's all.
What sort of feeling? Can you possibly describe it, where you had this feeling?
Just wanted to kill.
Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Paul Denyer. Viewer discretion is advised. Elizabeth Stevens was born on October 21st, 1974. Elizabeth was originally from Tasmania, but then she moved to Melbourne, Australia. And she did that in order to attend school, which I guess was at Frankston. And that was in January of 1993 when she officially made that move. On the evening of Friday, June 11th, 1993, Elizabeth had taken a bus and she got off that bus, which was pretty close to her home. Before she left home that morning, she left a note for her family. She lived with her aunt and uncle out there, and she said, I'm going to be studying at the library at the school for a little bit after, and I'll be home sometime around 8. But 8 o'clock came around and she never got home. The family just said, okay, she's just running a little late. Maybe the bus got delayed. You know, a lot of things could have happened. But then 9 o'clock came around, and then 10 o'clock came around. Still nothing. So by 10:30 p.m., they decide to go out there and start looking for her. This is obviously, again, before cell phones and all that. So you had to go like boots on the ground for this kind of thing. So her uncle would get in his car and he drove around the neighborhood. He drove around the entire town. He drove by the school. The aunt stayed at home just in case, you know, Elizabeth maybe came home. Her uncle had absolutely no luck finding her. So at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, he and his wife called police to report Elizabeth missing. She was 18 years old. Allegedly, it was like a really downpour, very, very stormy night, and it made searching very, very difficult. So they kind of had to call off searching for her just because it was just really hard to see anything and really go anywhere. And they resumed the search a couple hours later in the morning, and the day after she was reported missing, now on June 12th, at Lloyd Park on Cranbourne Road, some searchers discovered a body. It was a partially clothed body of a young female. She had her pants on, but her shirt and bra and everything were off of her. There was no identification on her person, and so as they're searching the area, because they're combing this entire area, they're searching for any kind of evidence, any sign of a murder weapon, anything like that that they can find. And as they're searching, they find this kind of bluish, whitish duffel bag, probably several hundred feet away from where the body was found. And when they opened the bag, they discovered items and things that identified who owned this bag. And they quickly determined that it belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Stevens. And then they were able to quickly tie that to the body they found, and they were able to confirm that the body was that of the 18-year-old girl. Elizabeth had been strangled. She was stabbed. And then ultimately her cause of death was a cut across her entire throat. She did also have 6 stabs directly in her chest area, and the coroner described them as very, very deep. So done by someone with a lot of force and a lot of aggression. Elizabeth also had several bruises to her face. She had a broken nose, and she had a lot of cuts on her hand, which to them indicated that she tried to fight back or at least defend herself. So she put up a struggle. Now, the fact that her shirt and bra were off would give the indication that this was likely a sexually motivated crime and that she had been sexually assaulted. But the coroner determined that there was no sexual assault done. There was no evidence to show that this perpetrator did that. And nothing appeared to be stolen from her duffel bag. Like, all of her belongings were still there. And nothing was stolen from her pants or anything. And so the motive wasn't a robbery. The motive wasn't sexual assault. So it really kind of baffled them. Why was she killed? As they're investigating, they basically were like, well, maybe this was an attempted sexual assault. And because she fought back, she was killed, and then the perpetrator just bolted. They also thought maybe there's just some deranged lunatic, maybe a homeless man who's just going around off his rocker and killed her. And they didn't really have much luck at the crime scene itself in terms of finding any physical evidence that would connect to her perpetrator. The crime scene was relatively clean for the most part. There was no fingerprints on the bag, no foreign hair samples on her body, no bodily fluids. Any blood that was there was all hers. So what they did was they did something a little bit different. They dressed a mannequin up in the clothing Elizabeth was wearing that night and like put a duffel bag around her, and they put this mannequin around town along the path that Elizabeth would have taken from the bus stop and all that, just to see if anyone could say, oh yeah, I remember saying that, but it didn't really yield much of anything, unfortunately. They did find out what bus she was on. They found out who the bus driver was. They questioned and interrogated the bus driver. They were able to find some of the passengers on that bus, and they quickly ruled them all out. They also went to the library she had gone to. They interviewed everyone that was there that they can possibly find. They got nothing. They interviewed people at her school. They interviewed people in her life, and they came up with nothing. Nothing at all. Everyone basically was cleared. They then started just basically knocking on everybody's door in that entire area, just door to door, asking everyone. Nothing. This was just like a ghost did this. It was baffling. Approximately a month later, on Thursday, July 8th, 1993, a 41-year-old woman was also getting off a bus. Her name was Rosa Toth. She got off her bus, and I guess she began to walk north on Railroad Parade. I guess that's a street. And she was fairly close to her house when at about 5:50 p.m., she was accosted by someone. A man would grab her from behind and try to drag her into this nearby park. This man put a gun to her head, but then she was able to quickly tell that it wasn't even a real gun. It was just this fake plastic thing. And so she was able to like knock it out of his hand, and she actually got free from his clutches, and she booked it. She ran and she escaped him. She had a couple of bruises to her body, but for the most part, she came out physically unscathed. Emotionally, obviously, not so much unscathed. But she was able to flag down a passerby. That individual drove her back to her house, where then they got in touch with police and reported this situation. She gave them the best description she could of this individual, but she didn't exactly get the greatest look at his face. Police would go out to where this occurred, to that park in that area where she was taken. They didn't find anything. They didn't find any evidence. They believed her. They just didn't find any like physical evidence to find who did it. Later that same night, on July 8th, 1993, a 22-year-old new mother, Debbie Freem, would go missing. Debbie was born in 1971, and she had lived in this area in Australia her entire life. Just 12 days prior to this, she gave birth to her first baby. Debbie was so excited to be mom. She was loving every moment of it. The baby's father was very involved in the baby's life, very loving man, and they had a really good relationship, you know, he and Debbie, and everything was going great. But that all changed that July 8th evening. At approximately 7 p.m., Debbie left the house, and I guess the baby's father was at work or something like that, and she left the 12-day-old baby with a friend to babysit. And she got into her car and she drove away. She literally just went to a store just to get milk because she wanted to make an omelet that night for dinner. That's the only reason why this all happened. After a couple of hours, the babysitter became very concerned, and they contacted the baby's father, and he became very concerned. And so he started calling like hospitals and police stations, like, has anyone reported anything? And nothing had been reported. No one was at a hospital that matched her description. So he goes to the police And this is the Frankston police station to report her missing. So a search begins for her, and they're looking everywhere for her. And it would be, I think, a couple of days after she went missing, police found her car. Her car was just parked on the side of a road in a neighborhood. It wasn't a quiet, hidden part of town. It was just sort of there in a very populated area. And the car was found on Madden Street. When they saw the car, they noticed a dent right on the front hood of the vehicle. There was like these little brownish specks in there to indicate maybe like a brick had hit it, or the car hit a brick wall or something. And as they're opening the doors and they're investigating the car, they've at this point have confirmed it's Debbie Freeman's car. They find blood on the driver's side, and they test that blood, and eventually it comes back to matching the same blood type as Debbie. Debbie was a pretty petite young woman, and the driver's seat was pushed back all the way almost. And so they know that if Debbie was sitting there, she couldn't have properly driven the vehicle. So that indicated to them that there was someone tall driving her car. And it would not have been, the baby's father. He was confirmed, his alibi was confirmed, I should say. His whereabouts were confirmed during all of this, and they quickly ruled him out of having any involvement with her disappearance. And then a day or so after her car is found in a field relatively close to where the car was found, now on July 12th, a farmer who lived on Taylor Road, and I guess this is in Carrum Downs, in a field where there's this fence and then just a bunch of bushes and debris, there was a body. This farmer found a body, and it was the body of a young female. Her body had 2 twigs over it, very thin, tree branches. And actually the first body, when Elizabeth was found, she also had a twig or 2 over her body, which police found very strange because they were these thin branches that would not have at all disguised the body. And they didn't really understand why it was that way. But they were, unfortunately, able to confirm that the body was that of 22-year-old Debbie Freeman. Debbie had 24 stab wounds to her body, all over her chest, her arms, her neck, and she also had indications that she was strangled, and her throat had been cut. Her body was also partially clothed, but again, the coroner determined that there was no indications that she was sexually assaulted. There was nothing missing from her car, nothing missing from her, in terms of any belongings she may have had. So again, robbery wasn't a motive, sexual assault wasn't a motive. And when they found her body and they realized when she went missing, and they pieced it together with the young woman who had been kidnapped earlier that day, because initially the woman who was kidnapped earlier that day who survived, they just thought, oh, this was a purse snatching attempt that just went really, really wrong. But when Debbie's body was found, they realized, and this is all in the same area, they realized, no, the first victim that day was probably going to be murdered as well. And that's when they also pieced together, this has to be connected to Elizabeth Stevens. So we have 3 women now who were attacked. 2 of them were brutally murdered. None of them sexually assaulted. None of them had anything stolen. So now at this point in Frankston, in this area in Australia, women are on high alert, understandably. They're going out in pairs. They're going out with a gentleman so that there's always protection. They're just being extremely cautious, as they unfortunately you had to be with all this going on. It became a nationwide story there in Australia. They nicknamed this person the Frankston serial killer. The Frankston police station set up a tip line for anyone in Australia to call with any information, no matter how small the information may seem. They went back to all the crime scenes. They combed everything as thoroughly as they can. They tried to get any kind of evidence they could find, but they were really just at a dead end. This person didn't leave much behind. Despite all the extra security cautions, there would still be one more victim on July 30th, 1993. Natalie Russell was born on October 25th, 1975. By 1993, she is a 17-year-old high school student. That night, she went out for a bike ride, and this was around 7 p.m. Natalie had the same bike path. She always rode around the same path every single time. When the bike rides were over, she typically took a shortcut home. And this was through Frankston North, I guess a road. And this was like a walkway with a really long like chain link fence down it. And this area was right next to like a golf club. When Natalie wasn't home by like 8:30, 9 p.m., her parents became very worried. They began looking for her. They couldn't find her. With everything going on, they obviously contacted police as quickly as possible to let them know. It would not take them long to find out where she was. Along that road that she would use as a shortcut with that long fence, some searchers found part of that fence had like a massive hole cut through it. So someone had taken like pliers or something and they snipped the fence open. And when they kind of look through the opening of that, where that hole is, they see a blue backpack kind of sort of hidden in some bushes. And so they get to the other side of the fence, they find the backpack, and then literally like just a foot away, they see a person's foot. And then as they kind of move some bushes out of the way, they find a body of a young female. She had a lot of cuts. She had a lot of defensive wounds to her hands and her arms. She had also some deep stab wounds to her chest and her head, and her throat was cut. And again, this young woman was also not sexually assaulted. They were able to quickly determine that this was 17-year-old Natalie Russell. Near Natalie's body, they found something else. They find this like leather strap, and the leather strap to investigators looked like that of which you would see on a pair of binoculars. And there was some trace amounts of blood on the binoculars, and also they found this piece of like skin that looked like it had been ripped off of someone's finger. Because it had like a fingerprint on the skin. And they were able to look at Natalie's body, the coroner, and they determined that she had no such injuries like that where she was missing that kind of skin. So they believe that the skin belonged to her killer. And on the fence post where that had been cut open, they find a pretty decent blood stain there as well. And they weren't sure if that was Natalie's or if that was the killer's. So this time they actually have some evidence that may be usable. So going back to the description that the surviving victim gave, she stated that this man was somewhere between 18 and 20 years old. He was tall. He had a very round face, a round figure. He was a little on the chubbier side. A profiler would describe him as someone who probably had either no job or a very menial job. That they likely lived alone and tended to be a loner, and was most definitely probably a local. After Natalie was found murdered, a postal worker would come forward to police to say that after Natalie's murder, like literally like the day afterwards, this postal worker saw a beat up, like rusted yellow Toyota Corona that was parked on the road just outside the pathway where Natalie had been found murdered. The postal worker saw like a larger man, a younger looking larger man, who then walked down the pathway where Natalie's body was found. This postal worker thought this was very odd because the man looked like he was in a hurry running down that path. And so she contacts police. Police arrive within minutes, and they don't find the man. The man is gone. But they do see that there is a registration label on the front windshield or somewhere on the front of this vehicle. They're able to take that registration information and find out who the car belongs to. The car belonged to a man named Paul Denyer. Paul Denyer was born on April 14th, 1972. Paul, growing up, always seemed to be a loner, always seemed to have trouble getting along with people, never fit in with the other kids. He had a lot of self-confidence issues. His parents said that that caused him to go into this sort of like mental state or depression that would then cause him to eat a lot, and he gained a ton of weight. When he was 11, he grabbed a knife and he slit the throat of his sister's stuffed teddy bear, which the parents obviously thought that was a little concerning. And then he killed the family cat. When he was 13, he stole a car. When he was 15, he assaulted a student at school. I guess he got into a little bit of trouble with the law for all these incidents, but really not much. And then after school, he had a very difficult time getting a job, staying employed. It just wasn't going well for him. In February of 1993, just before all these attacks began, Paul Denyer had broken into some woman's apartment or house and like killed her animals. And then like on the body of this murdered animal, there was a pornographic photo. And then written above the stove in this woman's house in blood was a message that said, "Donna, you're dead." And then throughout the house, more pornographic images were placed in random places. This incident would later be determined to be that from something Paul Denyer did. He would later admit that he did this. And then the murders began. So police go to his apartment and they asked if he would come down for some questions. And he says, yeah, absolutely. At first, he denies having any involvement in any of the murders. He gives a very detailed, like moment-by-moment recount of all of those. The days the murders took place, he seemed to remember everything he did precisely just those particular days, conveniently. Police asked him, like, is it just coincidence that your car was found near where a murder victim was and someone saw you going towards where the murder took place? And he said, yeah, it was coincidence. That wasn't me. But after being interrogated for quite some time, Paul Denyer began to just confess. He wasn't pressured into it, wasn't coerced. He just suddenly decided to admit what he did.
I saw her get off the bus. I walked up behind her, stuck my left hand around her, ran her mouth like this and held a gun to her head right here. I started choking her with my hands and she passed out after a while.
And why did he do it? What was his motive?
Just had the feeling, that's all.
What sort of feeling? Can you possibly describe it, where you had this feeling?
Just wanted to kill.
Yeah, he just wanted to kill. He just wanted to kill.
What did you want to kill her for?
Just same reason as before. No, I've always wanted to kill.
Since when?
Since I was about 14.
After he was basically confessing everything, he would take police to all of the crime scenes and he would show them what he did at each place. He would show how he took the victim. At one point, one of the crime scenes, he even kicked up some dirt because he buried an item from one of the victims, and it was the victim's purse or her wallet. And he found it right there as police were talking to him, and he took it out with his hand and he put it in an evidence bag. So the forensic team had taken the blood found on that chain link fence. They also took DNA from the skin sample that was found on the binocular straps. And they were able to link all of that DNA would match Paul Denyer. So he was now physically connected to the crimes. And when they were searching his house, they found a lot of tools, in particular a pair of pliers. They were able to take the pliers and match it up with the cuts that were done on that chain link fence. And basically, I guess every tool has its own little markings that are always different, a little bit different. They were able to scientifically connect his pliers to the ones that cut the fence. So not only did they have his confessions, but just in case, they now have physical evidence to literally place him at definitely one of the murders, and then his confessions to the other murders, and also the attack on Rosa. And that's when he confessed to the break-in of one of his neighbors where he killed the cat and left the pornographic images. He also confessed to another break-in where he did something similar but not as extreme. So Paul Denyer was then charged with 3 counts of murder and also kidnapping. He wouldn't go to trial. He would plead guilty to all of the charges. Paul was described as someone, when he was like recounting all of these crimes he did and like his interrogation and later on just going through the court proceedings, no emotion, completely flat. He showed no remorse. He almost seemed proud of it, sort of. Paul was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms where he could be eligible for parole after 30 years. And as a matter of fact, just literally very recently, I think it was not but a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, where he tried to get parole and he thankfully was denied because 2023 is the 30 years since the murders. So Paul Denyer is still currently rotting in his prison cell there in Australia. If you look at some of the articles about this case, you'll see some that are titled "Transgender Serial Killer Paul Denyer," which is interesting because Paul Denyer, while in prison, many years down the road after being convicted of everything, he would transition to becoming a female, where he would change his name to Paula. But then, not too long after that, he transitioned back to Paul. And so I just found it interesting that they titled him or labeled him a transgender serial killer when that had absolutely nothing to do with his crimes. He did have a resentment towards women, is what he would say. But it had nothing to do with his gender identity or anything like that. And so it's interesting how some places decide to stoke the flames, I guess, and like put that out there when that had nothing to do with anything. And he was transgender for like a brief time well after he was convicted. Just weird. But he is where he belongs, and hopefully he never sees the light of day. I don't think he's someone who should ever be released because the lack of remorse and how easy it was for him to lie and how easy it was for him to kill, this is not someone that should ever be free. But that is it for this case, True Crime-eroonies. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this YouTube channel for the first time, hello, I'm Mike. I tell true crime stories. I tell 4 a week here on YouTube. I tell a few throughout the week on TikTok, 1 on Instagram, 1 on Facebook. So please subscribe to me here, give this video a like so more people see it, and then go to my link tree in the description below and follow my other socials if you so choose. If there's a case you want me to cover, just email me. The email is listed in the description. Email me just the name of the individual, where it happened, when it happened, and I will eventually add it to my list. I pick my cases that I cover at random. I will cover yours eventually. I just can't tell you when. There's like 4,700 names on the list, so... Next, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. Also in the link tree below, we do ship internationally all over this great world, so you can do that if you like. If you have a Discord account and you want to join my Discord server, it's also linked below, but be over the age of 18. And I gotta go because the battery's dying. So goodbye, true crimers. It's gonna die me. Bye. It's flashing.